Welcome to my Bard story.
A warm welcome to you. Today, we're embarking on a profound deep dive into Genesis chapter 9, verses 1 through 17.
Right, and this isn't just, a list of old rules.
Not at all. It's really foundational. It unveils God's pivotal covenant with Noah right after the flood.
A completely new beginning for everyone and everything, really.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack the rich layers of meaning here. We'll look at theological insights, some fascinating historical context.
It maybe uncover some surprising things, right?
Oh, yeah.
Things that can change how we see it all.
Yeah, for daily life, for ministry, you'll find this ancient agreement, while it still resonates deeply today.
Timeless principles for faith and practice. Okay, let's dive in. Let's turn to our study notes, starting with Genesis 9, verse 1. We're using the NLT. Then God blessed Noah and his sons and told them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth."
Wow, that's immediate, isn't it? It's so powerful. God's very first action after all that devastation.
Right after the flood recedes, the ark lands. Boom.
Yeah.
Blessing.
Exactly. And it's striking how it echoes Genesis 1.28, the blessing on Adam. Almost word for word.
It's a clear signal then. A new creation.
A reset, absolutely. And that Hebrew phrase, sarut yurso, it carries this real weight, a renewed command.
An imperative for life to flourish again.
Right. Not just a suggestion. It's like God is empowering life to continue despite everything.
So this isn't just a simple good luck blessing. It's more like reissuing that original cultural mandate.
That's a great way to put it. It implies that, despite sin, despite the flood, God's original plan for humanity.
Just steward the earth, fill it.
It's still intact. It's like humanity gets a second chance at that big purpose.
Amazing grace right there.
Absolutely. And Kenneth Matthews points this out. He says, look, the blessing's almost identical, but the context.
Completely different now.
Totally. Humanity now has to do this in a world still grappling with sin, corruption, a world changed by the flood.
So the blessing is also an assurance, like God saying, you can do this even now.
Yes. His gracious assurance, his divine empowerment, Noah's descendants can succeed even in this tougher environment, speaks volumes about God's persistent grace.
And Klaus Westermann adds another layer, doesn't he, about the nature of the blessing itself.
He does. He sees the blessing as the inherent power God gives creation to survive, grow, reproduce.
Okay.
And crucially, it's universal, not just Israel, but all humanity, all creation.
So it's distinct from the covenant itself.
Right. The blessing is the engine for life. The covenant is the promise that sustains the relationship, gives it security. It's the breath of life, really.
Got it.
And Gordon Wenham even calls Noah a second Adam.
Marking a fresh start.
A fresh start for human history. He's the father of this new humanity.
But there's a but.
There is. This new beginning, as we'll see, is still going to be troubled by sin. The human heart hasn't fundamentally changed.
So God's plan is unwavering, even if we falter.
Exactly. The continuity of his purpose shines through despite human failure.
Okay, so God's blessing starts this new era. But then, verse 2. Wow, it feels like a jarring shift. It shows how different this world is. All the animals of the earth, all the birds of the sky, all the small animals that scurry along the ground, and all the fish in the sea will live in fear of you. They are all placed under your authority.
It describes a profound, stark transformation, doesn't it, between humans and animals?
Yeah, because before the flood, in Eden, no mention of fear. It was harmony.
Peaceful dominion. But now, God explicitly says animals will experience fear, mora, and dread.
It signifies a break then, a definite break in that original harmony.
Replaced by a dominion based on apprehension, maybe even antagonism. It's a stark contrast to Eden. Shows how far-reaching the fall was.
It feels, unsettling. Our authority is reaffirmed, placed under your authority, but the nature of it has changed, reflecting sin's impact everywhere. So what's the purpose of this shift? Why introduce fear?
Well, John Walton offers a suggestion. He sees this fear as a divine mechanism for human protection.
Protection. How so?
Think about it. The world's more hostile now. Humanity is vulnerable, rebuilding. Wild animals could be a real threat.
Okay.
So this fear allows humanity to safely exercise dominion, protect themselves. It's, pragmatic grace in a fallen world.
A safeguard. An advantage God gives us in this broken creation.
Exactly. It's not just a negative consequence, but also a provision.
Yeah.
God's care adapting to reality.
That makes a lot of sense.
And Victor Hamilton connects this fear directly to the next verse, the permission to eat meat.
Okay. How does that work?
He argues the animal's fear is almost a prerequisite for humans to hunt them. It hints at this new, more confrontational mode of survival.
Right, hunting would be much harder without that fear dynamic.
Definitely. It facilitates the new diet. It could have jeopardized survival otherwise.
So it's about survival, recognizing the new reality, the practicalities.
And Nahum Sarna clarifies, it's not like every animal flees in terror all the time. It describes a more fundamental internal shift in the relationship. The ideal harmony's gone, replaced by something more realistic, maybe harsher.
A reordering of the ecosystem.
Yeah.
A lasting impact of the flood. Okay, let's look at verses 3 and 4 together. They're closely linked, and wow, a really monumental shift here. I have given them to you for food, just as I have given you grain and vegetables, but you must not eat meat that still has the lifeblood in it.
This is a huge turning point. For the first time, God explicitly permits eating animals.
Because in Genesis 1, the diet was purely vegetarian. Plants, fruit.
Right. Now it expands to every living, moving thing. That Hebrew, koremesheshur, covers everything that moves and has life.
A massive change.
It's often seen as God's concession, maybe an adaptation for the post-flood world. Ecological changes, survival needs.
It signals that death and consumption are now part of the created order, a clear step away from Eden.
Absolutely. What are the deeper implications here? It seems to change the whole life-death dynamic, integrating it into just living.
Well, Kenneth Matthews calls it God's pragmatic provision.
Pragmatic.
Okay. Imagine the landscape after the flood. Devastated. Agriculture would be slow to recover, maybe some plants gone. So meat becomes essential, immediate sustenance.
Yeah.
For survival.
Exactly. But it also signals that death, violence, they're now just part of the created order, an unavoidable deviation from the ideal, a necessary but grim reality.
A necessary adaptation, but with that consequence.
Yeah.
Death is part of how we get food now.
Precisely. And Claus Westermann points out something interesting. While it's God's permission, it might also reflect the consequences of human sin.
How so?
Remember the lomas, the violence filling the earth in Genesis 6? Perhaps human violence is now sort of regulated, channeled towards animals, while strict boundaries are immediately set for violence against humans in the next verse.
Like God providing some order to our fallen inclinations.
It could be. And Gordon Wenham suggests this permission also subtly foreshadows the later clean and unclean food laws in Leviticus.
Like a stepping stone.
Yeah. The permission here is universal, but God would later regulate it for Israel, teaching them about sanctification in all areas, including food.
Right. Okay, but right after the permission comes this core prohibition in verse 4.
Crucially. But you must not eat meat that still has the lifeblood in it.
And the reason is clear. That is, its life.
Yes. In ancient Near Eastern and Hebrew thought, blood dam is profoundly the symbol, the vehicle of life, nepu.
So it's not just the liquid, it's the life source itself.
Exactly. So the prohibition isn't about hygiene, primarily. It's about deep respect for life itself.
Even if the flesh is food, the life essence, the blood, remains sacred, belongs to God.
It's a constant, tangible reminder of the giver of life, even when taking life.
Yes. And this law aims to curb human brutality, right?
Yeah.
Remind us that life source and sovereignty belong only to the Creator.
Absolutely. Burge and Hill emphasize its theological significance. It draws a clear line. Humans can take animal life for survival.
But must do it in a way that acknowledges life's sacredness.
Right. Draining the blood symbolizes returning that life essence to God. An act of reverence, even in consumption. A vital moral boundary.
And this principle became central later in Mosaic law, even mentioned in Acts 15, shows its lasting importance.
It does. And John Walton adds the cultural context. Drinking blood was often linked to pagan rituals, barbaric practices.
So this prohibition also separated God's people, taught them a different way.
A civil, God-fearing way. Plus, Victor Hamilton's analysis of NICOT is helpful. It means living being, individual.
So it's respecting each living individual, not just the liquid blood.
Exactly. Even when killing is necessary for food, it values every part of creation.
Okay, building on that respect for life, let's dive into verses 5 and 6. Foundational stuff for human value and justice. And I will require the blood of anyone who takes another person's life. If a wild animal kills a person, it must die. And anyone who murders a fellow human must die. If anyone takes a human life, that person's life will also be taken by human hands. For God made human beings in his own image.
These are the earliest, clearest statements in the Bible about the absolute sanctity of human life and capital punishment.
God says he'll personally require a reckoning. That Hebrew, edrish, Sounds strong.
It is. Seeking, inquiring, demanding a full accounting from anyone, animal or human, who takes a human life.
And then verse 6 introduces life for a life, the lex talionis.
Right, and anchors it in that profound truth. For God made man in his own image. The imago Dei, that's the cornerstone.
So this passage establishes several critical principles, doesn't it? Way beyond just punishment, affecting society itself.
Yes, absolutely. Foundational truths. First, the unparalleled value of human life comes directly from being made in God's image and own.
So murder isn't just ending a life.
It's an assault on God's image, an offense against the Creator, a desecration of his artwork.
Wow. Okay, second.
Second, it highlights God's justice defending life, establishing a mechanism for blood vengeance, not personal revenge, but upholding justice, curbing violence, maintaining cosmic order.
And third,
Third, critically, by human hands shall their blood be shed. This is the first time authority for capital punishment is explicitly delegated to the human community.
the basis for human government, judicial system.
Exactly. Aimed at protecting life, punishing evil, maintaining social order, a profound delegation of divine authority.
Kenneth Matthews clarifies God's the ultimate judge, but he chooses to work through human agents.
Right. Not personal revenge, but laying groundwork for organized legal punishment. Even killing an animal that kills a human just emphasizes the supreme value of human life.
Nothing that takes a human life gets a pass.
And Claus Westerman sees the structure God demands humans execute as a partnership. Divine authority, human responsibility.
He says the law is both punitive and protective.
Yes. Deterring murderers with severe consequences, safeguarding the community from chaos. A proactive measure for stability.
And Ellen Ross emphasizes this is universal, right?
Yeah.
Through Noah, for all humanity.
Vital point. It establishes a fundamental function of government in any society, protecting the right to life, with God's image as the unshakable foundation. Timeless.
Okay, let's look at verse 7 now. It brings us back to something we heard right at the start. Feels like a return. Now you, be fruitful and multiply and repopulate the earth.
It's almost a direct repetition of verse 1, isn't it? It forms a literary inclusio.
Like bookends around those serious laws in verses 2 to 6 about food, blood, murder.
Exactly. And it's not just for emphasis. It strategically places those heavy regulations firmly within the bigger context of God's continuing creative blessing.
He shows the laws aren't standalone rules, but part of God's plan for life to flourish.
Right. After setting strict rules for preserving life and justice, God immediately repeats his core purpose. Be fruitful, fill the earth.
Suggesting the laws aren't meant to restrict life, but create a secure, ordered space for it to flourish. Boundaries for flourishing, not limitations.
Gordon Wenham agrees. He sees this repetition as deliberate, shifting focus right back to God's blessing and life proliferating right after the severe laws.
The underlying message. The law's ultimate purpose isn't death, but promoting life, protecting God's creative design.
It's a powerful, hopeful affirmation of life, even in this fallen world.
A strong statement about God's ultimate intention, despite everything his purpose holds.
Indeed. And Victor Hamilton notes the wording here in verse 7 is even stronger.
Stronger how?
Besides be fruitful and multiply, it adds teem on the earth, the Hebrew shura.
The word used for fish, teeming in Genesis 1.
That's the one, implying God expects rapid, abundant growth, a vibrant explosion of new life.
Wow.
And John Sailhamer notes that the repetition also marks a transition from the first divine oracle about human responsibility to the second about God's covenant, confirming the mission before God lays out his commitments.
Okay, next up, the very heart of the Noahic covenant. Verses 8 through 11. God solidifies his promise, sets the stage for a new era. Then God said to Noah and his sons, I am making a covenant with you and your descendants, and with all the animals that were on the boat with you, the birds, the domestic animals, and all the wild animals, every living creature on earth. Yes, I am confirming my covenant with you. Never again will floodwaters kill all living things. Never again will a flood destroy the earth.
This is it, the core declaration. God proactively establishes his covenant. That Hebrew, meke me briti.
To make my covenant stand, or confirm my covenant.
Right, and what's vital here is that it's unilateral, unconditional, a covenant of grace.
Meaning humanity doesn't have obligations or conditions to meet.
Exactly. It's God's freely given binding promise, initiated entirely by his divine will and love for creation.
And it has some key characteristics that make it different from, say, the Mosaic covenant.
Yes, definitely. First, its sheer universality. That's striking.
It includes Noah, his descendants, all humanity, but also
Every living creature, birds, animals, wild, domestic, everything.
a cosmic covenant covering the whole created order. Shows God's care for everything he made.
It really does. Paints a picture of God's comprehensive plan. And second, while it's not explicitly called everlasting, right here that comes in verse 16,
The repeated never again emphasizes its permanence.
its permanent validity, enduring nature, a promise woven into creation itself for all time.
And that core promise, never again will floodwaters kill all living things. Never again will a flood destroy the earth. That must have been incredibly reassuring.
Immense relief, profound security for Noah and his family after such terror. This promise provides the fundamental assurance for the Earth's continued stability. It makes natural cycles, like seasons from 8.22, and human society possible.
It removes that paralyzing fear of another global flood judgment, provides a stable stage for life.
Right. Terence Verheim calls it a creative covenant, not a contract demanding things from us, but God's act of self-limitation.
God limiting his own use of destructive floods, specifically to sustain creation, out of grace.
That's a crucial point. His sovereign grace and commitment, a powerful act of divine restraint.
Wow.
And Nahum Sarna notes that verb establish, hokim, means confirm, make effective, suggesting God is formalizing the covenant he first mentioned back in Genesis 6.18 before the flood.
And its scope expands massively now.
From just Noah's family to all descendants and all living beings, shows the vastness of God's grace. Gordon Wenham sees it as God making his internal decision from 8.21 public.
I will never again curse the ground.
He translates that internal decision into a binding public commitment for all creation, demonstrating his faithfulness.
Okay, this brings us to that beautiful, universally known sign God gives. Verses 12 through 16. We all know the rainbow, but maybe not its deepest meaning. Then God said, I am giving you a sign of my covenant with you and with all living creatures for all generations to come. I have placed my rainbow in the clouds. It is the sign of my covenant with you and with all the earth. When I send clouds over the earth, the rainbow will appear in the clouds, and I will remember my covenant with you and with all living creatures. Never again will the floodwaters destroy all life. When I see the rainbow in the clouds, I will remember the eternal covenant between God and every living creature on earth.
God sets a visible sign out the rainbow. But here's what's fascinating and often missed. The Hebrew word kishet for bow.
It often means a weapon elsewhere, a war bow.
Exactly, for shooting arrows. This double meaning gives the rainbow a deeply symbolic, intentional meaning, far beyond just pretty optics. It's loaded.
So the sign works in several ways, not just a visual cue for us, but maybe even more for God himself.
Primarily, it's a visual reminder. And interestingly, the text keeps emphasizing it's for God to remember his covenant. When I see it, I will remember.
That's anthropomorphic language, right? Describing God in human terms. He doesn't literally forget.
Right. It's intended to powerfully assure us that God will never forget his promise. When we see a rainbow and storm clouds which might otherwise trigger fear,
We can be confident. God's faithful. His grace overcomes judgment. His promise stands.
it's God's way of saying, you can trust me.
So it's not that God forgets, but it's a comforting way for us to grasp his unwavering commitment, his active remembrance.
Precisely. And John Walton points out the ancient Near East context. Storm gods often wielded bows, lightning, weapons of wrath.
Right.
God radically transforms this image. His bow isn't aimed at the earth, it's placed in the clouds, symbolically hung up, disarmed.
Signaling the end of military action against the earth, conveying peace, not threat.
An incredible reversal, turning destruction's image into hope and grace, reframes the rainbow completely. Kenneth Matthews emphasizes God is the primary viewer. When I see it, I will remember gives us the greatest possible assurance.
The covenant's reliability rests entirely on God's character, not our memory or faithfulness.
Exactly. He binds himself to a natural phenomenon as a perpetual witness to his faithfulness, his immutability.
And it's explicitly called an everlasting covenant, resta olam, in verse 16, with the rainbow as its sign for all future generations, underscores its timelessness.
Yeah. And Noam Sarna clarifies the rainbow wasn't newly created then.
It existed before.
Yes, an existing natural phenomenon now infused with new divine meaning. God elevates something ordinary into a profound theological sign, shows his sovereignty over nature and redemption.
An ordinary thing made extraordinary by divine purpose, a daily reminder of his grace. Okay, finally, verse 17. A solemn, powerful conclusion to this whole covenant scene. Ties it all together. Then God said to Noah, yes, this rainbow is the sign of the covenant I am confirming with all the creatures on earth.
This is the concluding summary. A powerful reaffirmation, a sealing. God repeats it one last time to Noah. The rainbow is the sign.
For his covenant with all living things on earth.
It functions like sealing a formal contract, confirming its absolute validity, its authority for all time. God's final binding word.
It brings the focus right back to that visible, enduring sign, offering tangible hope, concrete assurance after the flood, a promise you can see.
Right. Claus Westerman calls it a solemn concluding formula, a divine pronouncement strengthening everything said before, ensuring Noah and all of us grasp the covenant's scope and the sign's meaning.
Drives home that message of divine commitment.
And Gordon Wenham points out a linguistic detail. The verb established, hakimi, is in the perfect tense here.
Meaning the action is complete, effective now.
Yes. It's not a future maybe promise, it's an already established binding fact. A done deal from God's side, made to stand firm.
And Alan Ross highlights that repeated phrase, all living things.
The passage consistently emphasizes the covenant's universal scope. Humanity and animals, no distinction.
Which contrasts powerfully with later, more selective covenants with Abraham or Israel.
Exactly. It underscores God's universal grace and providence over all his creation, a foundational act of common grace for all existence.
Okay, we've walked through the text itself, but now let's dig into some really captivating insights from scholars, maybe some aha moments you didn't expect.
Yeah, looking at aspects maybe even seasoned believers or pastors haven't considered, there's a richness here below the surface. Hashtag KA. The theological implications of eating meat.
All right, first up, the permission to eat meat. It's more than just diet, isn't it? It's a theological shift.
A profound one. Marks a new era. John Sailhammer suggests it might signify divine condescension.
Condescension. What does he mean by that?
It's a remarkable idea that God, in his grace, actually lowered his original Edenic standard, which was vegetarian, to accommodate human weakness, the realities of sin in a fallen world. It's not God compromising his perfect will, but adapting to a world impacted by sin.
Meeting us where we are in our brokenness. That's a powerful view of God's mercy.
Absolutely. It's not just physical need, but reflects our brokenness and the altered reality. God making allowances, which is itself grace.
Gordon Wenham wonders how this impacts the human-animal relationship fundamentally.
Yeah, he suggests it formalizes this chasm. Animals become, in a sense, resources for survival.
Implying that pre-fall harmony is replaced by a more utilitarian order.
Moving from peaceful coexistence to a more hierarchical, consumption-based relationship, a sobering reflection of the post-Eden world, shows how the fall affected all relationships.
A necessary consequence, maybe, but managed by God's provision.
And Claus Westerman asks if it also reflects practical changes in Earth's ecology post-flood.
Like farming got harder, meat became necessary.
He speculates, yeah, maybe farming was less productive, certain plants decimated, so meat becomes a necessary new food source, a practical adaptation to a reshaped world. Shows God's providence even in tough circumstances.
Okay, and Kenneth Matthews sees it setting a precedent.
Right, that God's willing to adjust specific commands across different eras based on conditions without violating his core moral will, shows his grace and flexibility in an imperfect world.
Always meeting humanity where they are.
And Victor Hamilton adds another thought. Maybe a preventative purpose?
Preventative? How?
Given humanity's propensity for violence, maybe it's better to regulate animal killing within a divine framework rather than allow arbitrary slaughter.
So the no-blood rule becomes a boundary, channeling violence, instilling reverence.
Could be. A way for God to manage the chaotic impulses of fallen humanity. Hashtag be an eye for eye. And the genesis of government.
Let's turn to Genesis 9.6 again. That life for a life principle, often cited as the basis for government's authority, especially capital punishment.
Precisely. Alan Ross digs into this. He asks if God is explicitly delegating part of his supreme judicial authority to human communities.
A significant handing over of responsibility. the origin of structured human governance.
That's the idea, to maintain social order, administer justice, suggesting government at its core is a divine institution meant to curb chaos and protect life.
So it's not just about punishment, but establishing order itself, a divine blueprint.
Absolutely. Victor Hamilton theorizes that by human hands shall their blood be shed, aims to prevent cycles of blood feuds.
Like Cain after killing Abel, where personal vengeance escalates.
Exactly. He suggests this phrase implies an organized, recognized judicial process, not unchecked personal vengeance, institutionalizing justice, creating a system accountable to God.
A crucial distinction.
Yeah.
Limiting chaos, establishing a system, not individual revenge, collective responsibility.
Right. And Gordon Wenham contrasts this with Lamech's arrogant boast in Genesis 4.
Where Lamech says he'll take vengeance 77 times.
The embodiment of unrestrained personal revenge. Genesis 9.6 shifts power to the human collective, the community, implying communal responsibility, collective justice. The goal is to restrict violence, not promote it.
For a more just, stable society where life is valued.
And John Walton brings in the ancient Near Eastern perspective. He points out that contemporary laws often settled murder with money.
Valuing property over life, effectively.
But the Bible sets this revolutionary standard. Human life is incalculable. Only the murderer's life is equivalent compensation. Highlights the unique dignity of humans in God's image.
A much higher standard.
And Nahum Sarna wonders if it's primarily a deterrent, setting severe consequences to establish a fundamental consensus: respect life.
Stemming violence at its root. Fostering a culture where human life is sacred. A proactive measure. #C. The rainbow as a war bow symbolism. Okay, the rainbow as God's war bow put away. That's a profound insight. Completely reframes how we see this familiar sight.
It really does. Transforms it from just optics to theology. Tremper Longman III talks about the ancient Near East context.
Storm gods with bows, symbolizing lightning and destruction.
Right. He suggests the biblical author adopts that familiar image, then radically subverts it. God's bow isn't aimed at the earth.
It's placed in the clouds, pointed upwards, hung up.
Symbolically hung up, disarmed, signaling the end of military action against Earth. It conveys peace, promise, not threat, a visual metaphor for divine restraint.
An incredible image. God disarming himself, turning judgment's tool into hope's symbol, an act of self-limitation for us.
And Kenneth Matthews speculates further, the bow pointing up, towards heaven, away from Earth.
What does that symbolize?
Maybe God turning the weapon towards himself, hinting at his personal commitment, perhaps even foreshadowing a future payment for sin through divine self-sacrifice.
Wow, a profound prefigurement. Looking ahead to the cross, God bearing the judgment himself.
A truly powerful thought. And John Walton adds, just transforming a war tool into a grace sign is a theological statement.
God showing he'll sustain the world through promise, not destruction. He's now restraining.
Victor Hamilton draws parallels to ancient kings hanging weapons in temples after victory, signaling peace.
So God the cosmic king, having triumphed over the flood, hangs his bow in the sky, proclaiming peace.
An era of peace and stability for all creation, a lasting peace treaty.
And Nahum Sarna adds the linguistic point. Kishet needs context. It's not just rainbow.
The author deliberately chose this double-meaning word to evoke the war bow idea, creating that strong contrast. Judgment to grace. Masterful. #Turbally. The mystery of God needing to remember.
Okay, the repeated idea of the rainbow being for God to remember his covenant. That raises deep questions, doesn't it? If God knows everything, how can he need to remember?
Great question. Points to how we understand biblical language. Terence Fretheim argues it doesn't mean God forgets like humans do.
Right, no memory lapses.
Instead, it's relational language. Anthropomorphism. To communicate a truth we can grasp. When God remembers in the Bible, it often means he's actively taking action based on his promise.
Bringing past commitment into present reality.
Exactly. So the rainbow assures us, when storm clouds appear, God will act in covenant faithfulness, not judgment. His remembrance is faithfulness in action, proactive engagement.
So it's anthropomorphism to help us grasp his unwavering faithfulness, comforting for us.
Precisely. Claus Westerman thinks it accommodates human understanding, our anxiety. Signs help us remember. The Bible uses language we get to convey God's unchanging faithfulness.
God sees and remembers to assure us the covenant stability rests entirely on him, his character, not our failing memory or faithfulness.
His steadfastness is the guarantee. The rainbow is the visible proof.
And Gordon Wenham adds that remember is a covenantal term, not just recalling, but making past promises a present reality.
Bringing them into active effect. When God remembers his covenant, he actively fulfills his grace and protection right now. It's ongoing dynamic.
John Salemer believes God's remembering isn't just his promise to us, but his active relationship with all living creatures.
It continuously sustains the relationship between God and all creation, the basis for creation's continued existence, ongoing providential care.
And Walter Brueggemann offers that fascinating thought. God willingly binds his freedom to a visible sign.
Choosing to let his actions be limited by his promise, constraining his own power for creation's sake.
That self-limitation. Brueggemann says it's the deepest expression of God's grace.
An astounding act of humility and commitment from the Creator. #3. Core teachings and pastoral implications for today's believers.
We've unpacked the history, the theology. But what does this ancient covenant mean for us today? Especially for those leading in ministry. Let's bring it into our present.
How do these ancient words speak now? #A. God's universal grace sustains our world.
The Noahic covenant. It feels like the clearest picture of God's common grace, doesn't it?
Perhaps the clearest, most universal example. Despite humanity's sin needing the flood, God's response isn't more wrath, but this covenantal guarantee.
Promising not just no more flood, but reconfirming creation's blessings, assuring life continues for everything.
It's a pervasive, undeserved favor extended to all creation, not just a select few.
A powerful reminder that the world's stability, the order we take for granted, it's a profound daily gift of his grace.
Even amidst sin and suffering, the natural order, seasons, basic society, life itself rooted in God's faithful, unconditional promise here, it underpins everything, every breath. And Terence Fretheim points out, this covenant-sustaining creation is the very stage for all God's later redemptive actions, leading to Christ.
So believers should cultivate deep gratitude for this universal grace, recognizing God cares for all creation.
Absolutely. Sustaining even those who don't acknowledge him, it impacts how we see providence daily. God's hand isn't just in miracles, but in ordinary rhythms.
For pastors, teaching common grace could help people find gratitude even when specific prayers aren't answered as expected.
Exactly. Understanding God's broader plan of sustenance is always at work, avoids a narrow theology, embraces God's cosmic concern, #needy, the unwavering sanctity of life and our responsibility.
Okay, God permits eating meat, but immediately adds that rule about blood and life, centered on the sanctity of life.
Right. Kenneth Matthews emphasizes it's not just diet, it's worldview. Life's sovereignty belongs to God alone. The blood prohibition reminds us, even with authority, we must never usurp the Creator or disrespect life, a constant boundary against human hubris.
And that respect for animal life elevates to the absolute protection of human life in verse 6, because we're made in God's image.
Providing fundamental principles for life ethics today, abortion, euthanasia, even capital punishment's role in justice, places infinite value on every single human being.
From conception to natural death.
So any assault on human life is a direct desecration of God's image. An offense against him diminishes his glory.
And God entrusts the community with responsibility for justice. Requiring blood vengeance becomes the foundation for government.
Reminding believers of our duty. Advocate for justice, protect the vulnerable, build a culture respecting life. It's not just theology, it's a call to active engagement.
For pastors, a clear call to speak prophetically. Equip people, foster compassionate action.
Yes, understanding the biblical basis for life's sanctity and acting on it. #C. Living in the tension between fear and peace.
The post-flood world shifted from harmony to fear between humans and animals. Walton called it a pragmatic arrangement in a fallen world.
Reminds us we live in that already but not yet tension. Our world is an Eden. It's marked by alienation, conflict due to sin. Affects all relationships. We feel the false consequences daily.
Yet the rainbow God's war bow put away symbolizes a promise of peace, divine restraint.
And the prophets envision future harmony. Isaiah 11, wolf and lamb together, points to ultimate restored reconciliation, a coming shalom beyond our broken reality. A beacon of hope.
So believers are called to live out that future reconciliation now, in the midst of the tension.
Exactly. Realistically acknowledging the world's brokenness, not being naive. But also, as citizens of the new creation, actively striving to promote harmony, heal relationships, treat all creation with compassion.
Pre-living the coming kingdom of peace, guiding our interactions with environment, animals, each other, demonstrating the gospel's power.
Pastors can help people grasp this tension, encourage them to be agents of peace, reflecting God's design in a world longing for it. #D. Humanity's renewed mission as stewards of creation.
Even with the changed relationship with nature, God still entrusts humans with stewardship, doesn't he?
That responsibility endures. The permission to eat meat, plus the blood prohibition, constantly reminds us our power is limited, delegated. We're managers, not owners. A sacred trust.
Gordon Wenham suggested the blood-draining ritual taught reverence for life, even when exercising power. Respect for the Creator.
Which has huge implications for environmental ethics today. We're not called to exploit greedily, carelessly.
But manage creation with wisdom, foresight, gratitude, acknowledging God's ultimate sovereignty. Our dominion is a trust, not a license to destroy.
Right. Our care for the environment stems from reverence for the Creator and respect for the fact the Noahic covenant included all living things.
Not just us.
Exactly. Informs our approach to sustainability, ecological justice. For ministry leaders, it means teaching a robust biblical environmental ethic, seeing creation care as part of worship, obedience, holistic discipleship, #GD, discerning God's work in natural revelation.
And finally, this powerful point. God chose the rainbow, a universal natural phenomenon, as the sign.
Yeah, Walton reminded us biblical authors often transformed cultural symbols, imbued them with new theological meaning, like the war bow.
Teaches us a crucial lesson. Learn to perceive the world with eyes of faith. See God's message as his hand in the ordinary.
It's amazing God speaks not only through the Bible special revelation, but powerfully through creation general revelation.
Revealing his faithfulness, power, beauty every day if we pause to look.
So every time we see a rainbow, it's not just pretty, it's an invitation. Pause. Reflect on God's unchanging covenant grace spanning ages.
A constant, visible, universal reminder of his steadfastness, his commitment to sustain creation, visible in everyday phenomena.
And for that, deep gratitude, worship. For pastors, a beautiful way to connect faith with daily experience. Help people see God's glory not just in church or scripture, but in the sky above. #had outro.
What an incredibly rich, deep dive into Genesis 9 today. We've covered so much: the theological shifts, the origins of justice, God's enduring universal grace.
It really hits home how foundational this covenant is, not just way back then, but for our world, our faith right now.
Absolutely. The sanctity of life, the call to stewardship, the certainty of God's promises, timeless truths resonating from this passage.
They really shape our worldview, our daily lives.
Indeed. And as we close, here's something for you to carry into your week, especially those of you leading in ministry. How might actively highlighting God's common grace, shown so clearly in the Noahic covenant, reframe how your congregations understand everyday life?
Could it challenge them to see God's hand not just in the big miraculous stuff, but profoundly in the steady rhythms of creation, the very fabric of society?
Think about how that reorientation could deepen gratitude, inspire responsible stewardship, and strengthen faith even when the world feels broken.
What concrete opportunities are there, right where you are, to teach and preach on this pervasive, sustaining grace that underpins everything?
Right.
How could that lead to a richer, more robust faith engaged with the world?